Good Tuesday to you, everybody. Incom/gov 664. Welcome to week Kaboom 2. How's everybody doing? Let's do this right. That's a messy cup. We don't like to see that on film. Okay. A little early afternoon espresso, which, by the way, takes its name from the Italian verb espressare, which means to press through, to push through. It's not espresso as in express, meaning fast. It's espresso. The water is pushed through the coffee grounds. Just thought you'd like to know. How's everybody doing? All right, let's take a look at what we're going to be doing this week. Now, this being an 8-week course, things move along quickly, so you need to stay on top of it. Okay. So this week we're going to be diving into the readings in MAP and PIP to ask and answer the critical question: can we trust the media? This week has been a doozy for those who would ask that question. Insofar as we've gotten, there's a book being released by Jake Tapper over at CNN, which claims there was a big cover-up within the media concerning the mental acuity of our 46th president, President Joe Biden. And it was announced this week that our 46th president, Joe Biden, has advanced prostate cancer, which is spread to his bones, which is not something that happens within the last few months. That although very common, much more common than breast cancer, prostate cancer is a slowly moving, creeping disease, and it's probably something that somebody knew about for a number of years, and for reasons that aren't clear, was not disclosed or discussed by the media. So we're going to ask that question: can we trust what we're getting? And if not, I mean, if we can't trust the media, who do we trust? Because these are the folks that within our Constitution, they get broad protection under the Second Amendment. And the reason is it's assumed that they're there to hold the government responsible, that they are there as us, enabling us to hold our government responsible. Okay. So that's what we're going to be looking at for this week. So if you go to the module, you will see the readings. We've got who do we have? You're going to be reading chapters 7 through 12 in PIP, and chapters 5, 8, and 10 in MAP. Okay, and then discussion questions to go with them. This week for the discussion questions, don't panic. When you open them up, you're going to see a whole bunch of them. There are 7 in there. And look, because, when you do it in 8 weeks, you're covering a lot of material. We're moving fast. There's just no way that within a week, 3 or 4 discussion questions, you can cover everything. So from these 7, you get to pick 3 and then answer those 3. Now, I still want you to respond to your classmates, and you might say, well, I didn't pick that question. Well, that's the point, because your classmates may answer a question that you didn't pick, but I want you to, recall enough, because you've read all of the material, that you could have something to say back to your classmate concerning what they, laid down in their response, even if you didn't answer the question. Okay, so yes, please participate. Okay. This week also, well, through this week, technically the due date is the 26th, which is not until the next week. But your first movie review is due. Now, in the assignment folder, you'll find the list of films for you to choose from. You have to choose from that list. Okay. And likewise, that offering, that's where you'll upload your first film review. And I'll just, put a new one up each time with the same instructions and the same sheet, or the same text embedded in it. And then, but I'll change it. It'll be like film review number 2, number 3, number 4. Okay. Please follow the instructions carefully. Make sure by way of word range, I'm not going to penalize you for going over 1,000 words. If you come in substantively under 750, I can't say right off the top of my head that I'm going to penalize you, but I may, be taking a close look as to whether you covered each of the 3 main areas that I've asked you to drill down on. First is well-written, tightly focused summation of the historical context of the story that's portrayed in the film. Give us some backstory here. What's happening? What's going on? So let's say that you wanted to watch the Killing Fields, which is a very powerful film. Okay, tell us a little bit about the Vietnam War. Tell us about the bombing in Cambodia. Why was it going on? Who are the Khmer Rouge? What sort of mistakes were made about the government's assessment of the Khmer Rouge, driven by reports from the media? Just to give us a backdrop, okay? But it needs to be tight and informative. Then number 2, likewise, a well-written, tightly focused discussion of the film's major themes. Now, I give you some hints in the summations of the film there on the film list, and there are, 11 of them to choose from, okay? So, reading that text, look for the themes, or, look it up. Find a little bit about the film and look for the major themes, okay? If you can tie them into what we're reading in our text, so much the better. And then a brief summation. This is the smallest part of this read. What did you think about the film? What did you think about this film as an artifice? That's from whence we get the word art. Artifice is a representation of the thing. It's not the thing itself. How well did it communicate it? Did it convey these themes as an artifice or not? Okay. All right. So that's coming up May 26th. Make sure that you do that. All right. And then readings, and you only have to pick 3 out of the 7 questions. Okay. Let's take a look at what you had to say about the questions from last week. We did sort of an introduction, just cracking into the 2 texts. Okay, and the questions were, what is new media, citing material from at least 1 chapter of both Pips and Map? Discuss some of the ways that new media is impacting the political landscape of the 21st century America. In your opinion, is the impact positive or negative? Now, the final exam will be composed of questions that are taken from these discussion questions. In some instances, it'll be like the exact question. So pay attention to the text material that these questions shine a light on. Not just like that one spot in the text. I rarely ask questions that just, according to your author on page 9, paragraph. Once you get the idea, all right, not just, oh yeah, this spot right here in the text. Okay, Nathaniel, you went last, so let's take you first. New media can be called multiple things, but primarily consists of a diversity of methods in which information gets spread across the internet. Yeah, that's one way to put it. I mean, new media also might be stuff that's not on television or radio. Okay, so you could define it by way of platform. Okay, you can define it by way of presenter. New media, one of the hallmarks of new media is the presenters are not always from a professional media class. I mean, who's Tim Pool? All right, and I know who Tim Pool is, but you understand what I'm saying, okay? In terms of production value, new media often does not have the attention to production value that traditional media does. Crowder, who's Crowder? Who's loud? What is louder with Crowder? Or Daily Wire? Okay, so these are ways that we could define new media. It's not just spread around the internet. There are characteristics of it apart, because you can find traditional media on the internet. You can find Fox and ABC and CNN and all that sort of stuff. All right, but let's continue. It still has some forms of old media, including TV, magazines, newspaper, but the digital landscape introduced blogs. There you go, social media, video sites, and other methods within the American people can consume and interact with politics. Okay. Not so much, they're not interacting with politics through the media, but you do make an important point here, Nathaniel. And that is that one of the characteristics, one of the hallmarks of traditional media has been a monologue. It's the media telling you what's going on, whether that's in print or broadcast. New media functions as much as a dialogue as it does a monologue. Some real interesting studies about how people get news from new media, and that is that in some instances, depending on the provider, the content provider, and the platform, people will spend as much time gathering information from the interaction, that is from the comment section, as they do from the source that generated the comments. And they will develop opinions and a level of notion that I am informed based on the comments, based on the and then they want to participate based on the dialogue. Okay, so that's another characteristic of new media that I want you to be aware of. If somebody says, new media, okay, it's interactive, it's dialogue, not just monologue. Information gained by these forms of media have become a method that is used to persuade younger individuals into certain attitudes. Okay, watch your grammar there. Ideas, you don't persuade anybody into something, you persuade them of behavior regarding politics given. And by the way, if I pull one of your answers and I say, this is do this, don't do that, I'm not picking on anybody. Okay, we're looking at process. We're looking at process. We just lots of love here on this room for everybody. Okay, while the internet and social media have given rise to many novice level journalists, that's again an important characteristic is who's presenting. The primary forms of journalism companies in the past have adapted and remain the most influential in the market. That being said, the primary forms of journalism companies in the past have adapted and remain most, adapted, since adopted my. That being said, it has ensured that there is a diverse pool where information can be gathered, making the regulation of said information opinions much more difficult than in prior years. Yeah, when we've heard over the last year or so, all kinds of chatter about fake news and misinformation and disinformation, and we need to have regulations for this or that. That's a tough line to walk when you take a look at our First Amendment. In many ways, the internet is an innovation, a platform that's back to the future. What do I mean by that? Well, in the 18th century, that is the 1700s, and the 19th century, that is the 1800s, there was just a panoply, a cornucopia of printed media sources. They didn't have the technology that drives the internet, but there were thousands of publications throughout the United States of all sizes, full-blown newspapers, little pamphlets, little trifolds that would come out. Anybody that could lay their hands on enough money to put up a printing press or to pay somebody with a printing press, and printing presses were all over the place, could crank out a set piece of media. And they were in all languages. There were publications specific to certain ethnic groups, on all political persuasions. Okay. And then there were a series of laws passed, especially at the beginning of the early 20th century, sedition acts that said, to publish things that criticize the government's not going to be allowed. To publish things in a language that the government doesn't necessarily understand is not going to be allowed. Squash, 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 squash. And the number of publications was dramatically reduced, particularly because of the first of the two world wars, World War I and World War II. Coming out of World War II, tremendous amount of government influence in media, and a reduction of the number of outlets. Now, on the other side of 1996-ish, the spigot is opened back up again. So it's, in many ways, you might say that what you're talking about is new old media. Okay. All right. Good answer, Nathaniel. Question number 2, according to I think it's going to say Shunson, why do we need an unlovable press? Okay. Let's take a look. Valerie, what do you have to say? Shunson argues that we need an unlovable press because the press role is to scrutinize, investigate, and hold power accountable, even if doing so makes it unpopular. He is of the opinion the press should not be engaged in the business of reassuring or appeasing the public, but rather the pursuit of transparency and the challenge of authority. Okay. All fair statements. Here's the problem that modern press is facing. Okay, and then you go on to talk about the health of the democracy, which is true, Valerie. Okay. The media business is a high stakes, high profit business. And what I mean by high stakes is that in our current media environment, there is less of a success curve that a publication might land on, and it's more like a success tower. There's this little spot up here, success, and then whoosh, a sharp drop off on both sides of failure, meaning no revenue and no means by which to produce your product. And this it's into this gap that bloggers and you might even refer to them as the rise of the non-expert expert. Think of the podcast called Whatever. If you've never heard of the Whatever podcast, I mean, watch this thing for just a little bit. Okay, and it focuses in on relationships and social issues and gender issues. But you listen to these guys, it's like, who are these guys? You know, what is it exactly that qualifies them to be proffering these opinions with any sense of veracity, of authority? Right? Well, the production value is the production cost is so low that they can get up onto that little teeny profitable platform without falling off the sides. So don't think of a bell curve. Think of something like a skyscraper right in the middle of the graph. Okay, that characterizes the pressures of the new media environment. And in that environment, media companies are loathed to not be liked by some segment of the audience. All right, let's go back to you, and I'll say a little bit more about what that means, and you need to watch out for media. The health of a democracy is contingent upon the existence of an unlovable press, which functions as watchdog that regulates the government and private industry. The press would be unable to fulfill its primary function of furnishing citizens with critically, frequently disagreeable information that is essential for making, etc. United States has experienced a rise in political polarization, as evident by the consumption of media that reinforces pre-existing beliefs of significant numbers of citizens. Okay, good point, because that's a good segue into what I want you to know about this. It's hard to parse out which happened first. Was it because politically, the United States was designed to allow polarization. The representative republic system is designed to allow each of the states to do their own freaky thing. All right, if you want to go out to California and get your freak on, knock yourself out. Take the reversal of Roe versus Wade. This is a good example. All right, it's it may seem like a contradiction in legal terms. Okay, for the Supreme Court to say there's no guarantee of abortion in the Constitution, but we're going to let the states decide what goes in their region. It's like, well, if there's no allowance for this, why are we allowing it? This is something that was baked into the system. It was done that way, that is, allowing states to do things that are different in order to relieve pressure that tends to build up within a larger state, that is the entire country. Where this design, it's a good design. it's probably one of the better in the world, but it's not perfect. And where the design has run into trouble is where you get into states setting up systems that, one, cause problems in other states, and two, violate fundamental characteristics of human freedom, characteristics that are outlined in not the Constitution strictly speaking, but the Declaration of Independence, which is the preamble. And the top of the list is that of freedom from enslavement. And you know, I mean, you can fault the country. I think it's a fair fault, and the designers of the country when they're putting the country together. Did you know that with the initial draft of the Constitution wrote slavery out? And that was Jefferson's idea. And when this was sort of floated around, a couple of the major colonies, namely the Carolinas, were like, "Yeah, no, you put that in, we're out." So those that were framing the government and the Constitution, the early breakaway entity from England, are like, well, I guess we got to compromise. Is that a good idea? Kicking this can down the road, this issue down the road. Yeah, I'll just let them deal with it. And I've looked at this historically with great curiosity. I don't know how exactly they thought that this was going to work itself out, that you would have some states that were slave states, and the essence of which, that a slave state is the idea that while everybody's human, everybody is some people are more persons than others because some people are property. Well, no, that doesn't work. Okay, and it's the same very much with abortion. If human life begins at conception, which it does, I mean that's scientifically established. There's a unique individual form. It doesn't matter the location of the individual, that where you're at doesn't impact your uniqueness. At what point is that individual entitled to the right to life? And so likewise, you can't say, well, we'll just let them work it out. And God bless their foolish little hearts. They tried to work it out by saying, well, okay, so for every new state that comes into the union, we'll play, eeny meeny, slave state, free state, slave state, free state, slave state, free state. And this just created this checkerboard of tension and contention as the states expanded west. And by the time you get to the middle of the country, Missouri, which is a slave state, is butt right up against Kansas, which is a non-slave state. And the only thing that separates them is a river that's not that too hard to get across. The Kaw, the Missouri River. And it's like, whoops. So, we've designed, we have by design a contentious political arrangement. So don't, I don't like it when I read and people are, I say, oh, well, the country is more contentious than ever. Yeah, no, it's not. Okay, it's just factually is not. And then to sort of put forward the proposition that we're supposed to, we're designed to not have any conflict. No, we're not. In fact, again, to that very point, the framers, the designers of this country designed our government to have conflict. I mean, it was their design to set up a government that was constantly checking. One side was checking the other, in part to make sure things ran well, but also in part to keep it out of your hair as a citizen. That it would checks and balance itself into paralysis, just not doing anything to you, because the less it did to you, the better it was in the minds of the designers. Okay. But let's go back to as evidenced by the consumption media that reinforces pre-existing beliefs by a significant number of citizens. Okay, so this is how media companies have decided that they're going to survive in this very, very tight and fiercely competitive marketplace. Remember, don't think of media company survival as this gentle bell curve on a graph. Think of it as like no survival. Shoot, these companies are making money. Drop off. Nobody. It's like a skyscraper. The model that they've come up with is that they're going to focus on a particular ideological band on the political spectrum and talk to those people. And that's where their revenue is going to come from. And yes, you were right, Valerie. I think what you're getting at here, and that causes problems because one of the ways that they do this, talk to those people that on that particular bandwidth, and whether it's conservative or liberal, it doesn't matter, is reinforce their opinions. So the media that you're seeing, that we're experiencing, is less and less about description and more about opinion bias reinforcement. And we see it manifest right now with the information, with the situation that's unfolding around the president. Okay, because to make money, people say, "Oh yeah, he's fine. He keeps me on the run." And I mean, the whole country's watching this poor guy. Can't find his way off the stage. Or you watch him during the debate against the challenger, Donald Trump, and like, this guy's running circles around you. Yeah, how far gone are all the rest of you? Yowie. Okay, question number 3. Let's look at you, Heather. Okay. Question number 3 goes, in your opinion, is the growth of infotainment and amateur journalism endangering our democracy? Now, that's not as straightforward as a question as you might imagine. I'm being a little tricky. I'll be honest. I'm being a little sneaky because democracy, I'm a linguist fundamentally at heart. Democracy means rule by the crowd, the demos. It comes from the Greek word demos. Excuse me. And within our system, okay, amendment numero uno, you get to have your say, and you get to have a free press that disseminates your say. And there's nothing in there about professional anybody. So if you clamp down on that, isn't that the clamping down on our democracy itself? But on the other hand, if you have knuckleheads, and I'm not pointing to any source in particular, running around telling the public this is this and that is that, and up and down as black as white and cats are dogs, and everybody's going like, whoa, I don't know any of this. Does that cause instability and endanger the republic? Right? And now, by the way, there aren't necessarily answers that work all this out just like snappity snap. Okay. Heather, let's see what you have to say. The growth of infotainment and amateur journalism is not endangering democracy, and amateur journalism can provide unique insights into the situation that traditional journalists could not. Livingston et al. Demonstrate this through their example of Iraq blogger who presented many readers with unique insight into the daily lives of someone living in a war zone. Even professional journalists in The Guardian recognized the value of bloggers' accounts and eventually started posting his work. Regardless, infotainment and amateur journalism, excuse me, are not perfect. The authors show this in their example of inaccurate social media journalism, sharing an article about Zuckerberg that claimed he passed away, or that he's a robot, while he was actively denying fake news allegations in real time. This report represents the aforementioned problem with new media streams of information is more bountiful, and inaccuracies abound. Okay, good answer. All right. It's interesting. Americans are by nature action and solution oriented. You tell them a story. Those of you, whether you're going into communication or government, you need to wrap your head around this fundamental characteristic of Americans. If you tell them a story, at the end of the story, it used to be when I was a kid, what was looked for was the moral of the story. What's the point? Okay. What's the lesson to take away? Now, more and more, the audience is expecting, by way of what's the point of the story, what am I, or we collectively supposed to do? And of the things supposed to be done, which ones will fix the issue that you're addressing? All right, remember that when you tell stories, whether you're in politics or you're in communication, because if you tell stories that lack action items at the end, and then lack some assurance or assertion that these action items will fix things, people may not listen to you. Now, it is morally incumbent upon you as Christian communicators and thinkers, and politicians and analysts, and so on and so forth, to one, come up with an action list, a list of action items that are relevant and pertinent to the problem. All right. And I'm going to pick on a couple of things right now. All right. You being required by a city municipality to separate your cardboard and plastic into separate bins is not going to solve the problem of, say, plastic in the ocean. Because unless you live on the coast, which most of us don't, I don't, all right, and your municipality throws plastic in the ocean, which they shouldn't do anyway, taking your plastic and putting more energy into the repurposing of that plastic than it takes to make the original plastic doesn't solve anything. And no, plastic does not, fill up landfills to the point that they can't accept anything else. I go, well, it never degrades. Most of what goes into a landfill is going to take centuries to degrade. So some portion of it is non-degradable over 5,000, not going to make a bit of difference. I'm not saying that there aren't environmental problems. I'm not saying that there isn't plastic in the ocean. I'm not saying that we've got to figure out something to do with the waste that's naturally generated by consumption. What I am saying is that those who run around and say, well, this is sustainable, as opposed to this is wasteful. Look, there's nothing that's sustainable. Sustainable would mean that it generates itself in perpetuity. And if we could figure out a perpetual motion machine, well, we'd solve a whole bunch of problems, not just those related to the environment. Every process creates waste. All right, so it's incumbent upon you to put together action items that address the problem, not action items for the action themselves. And then number two, to use your knowledge, your training, your humility to ascertain what, if anything, these action items will do to address the issue at hand. And if the answer is they won't, be honest. I currently have a piece, that I wrote that's sort of circulating around of a national publication looking at it, where I talk about how it is that parents can know how to navigate the questions of, are these, is a particular vaccine necessary and is it safe? Because it's not as straightforward as you might think. Okay. Currently, for parents, there's really not, a one-stop shop source to answer those questions. It's just not there. And I admit as much at the conclusion of the article. Okay. So Americans are action and success oriented. That's what they want. It's a very, very, sort of interesting, peculiar aspect of our nature, and where infotainment and journalism are concerned, say this is how we deal with misinformation. We're going to pass laws and set up a government bureau. No, we're not. It's not going to work. Or you may have noticed, and it's amusing to watch it develop. certain platforms will have algorithms that flag certain words and certain texts. All right. Yeah. You know, so concerning a device that might be, let's see, concerning a device, see, I don't want to get this video flagged. Concerning a device that might be made out of metal, contain a small canister with gunpowder with a piece of lead at the end that's used from everything from self-defense and commission of a crime. You don't use that word when you're describing it. If you're doing a video that's platformed on this platform, YouTube, you say pew pew, because the algorithm doesn't catch that. But everybody knows what you're talking about. Okay. All right, everybody, watch your film. Okay. Make sure to follow that instruction sheet carefully. All right. If you have any questions about what we're doing, make sure to reach out and contact me. This video runs about a half an hour and change. I try to keep it within 20 minutes. So sorry, a little bit longer than normal, but make sure that you watch this as with all subsequent videos, because there's going to be material in here that will be used to put together your final exam. All right, everybody, have a fantastic week, and I will see you on Canvas. God bless. Bye-bye.